What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Curious Talk podcast. I'm Caleb Nagusi. Today we have Nicole Ponce, licensed therapist, and today we're going to be talking about trauma. How are you doing today, Nicole?
Good. How are you?
Thank you so much for coming out. I'm doing great.
Of course.
Alrighty, let's get started. So, first things first is what is it about trauma that makes it stick and for such a long period of time?
So trauma, the theory behind what happens with trauma is that it kind of freezes the brain whenever information is being processed. So normally when your brain is processing information, it just stores it into your memory and you can access it when you want to. But with trauma, the brain, the memory gets stuck. And it does that because it wants to access it quickly to prevent you from having to experience it again. So it turns out that people are living their daily lives and something triggers it and their trauma is right there in the forefront of their brain and it's making them react to something that's not happening anymore.
Well, does that have to, whatever happens on the outside, does it have to be related to their trauma in order for it to trigger it?
It usually is, but it won't be so obvious. So when somebody experiences trauma, everything that happens in that moment gets kind of stuck into the same box. So it could be like a brown shirt because somebody at the moment was wearing a brown shirt. So something that isn't obvious could be triggering it. It could also just be how you feel. So if I feel scared, it could trigger my trauma reaction.
Oh, okay. I was reading a article. It stated that if you've experienced trauma at a young age, say at 12 years old, sometimes as you get older, you still feel like a 12-year-old. Is that true?
Very true. We do a lot. I do a lot of inner child work, which is kind of going back to that age that you experienced the trauma and speaking to what a 12-year-old or a 9-year-old would need at that time versus what an adult would need at the time.
Oh, okay, okay. Really interesting. The next question is, can the same type of trauma affect two individuals two different ways, or is does each trauma have its own specific sign of hurt?
Oh yeah, two people can experience the exact same thing together and have different reactions. It really just depends on what you're going into the situation with, how you personally experienced it. The more out of control you feel, the more likely you're going to be impacted by the trauma. So people that have a little bit more, maybe even more experience dealing with something like that, might not have such a strong reaction to it.
Okay. So that means that it's sometimes hard to pinpoint by how they're reacting of a specific type of trauma or whatever happened.
Right. Yeah. You'd have to really talk to the person. And most people don't know unless they know specifically this is when something started happening or started having symptoms. Most people, you have to go into therapy and kind of figure out where everything stemmed from.
Oh, okay. Um, is it possible that the people we label as evil are reacting to past hurt?
Mhm. For sure. Yeah, I've known some people that outside of my session, they would be describing themselves as very angry or trying to get into fights with people or trying to manipulate people. And all of that for them was a result of trying to feel in control again. So trying to kind of make up for feeling out of control when they had their traumatic experience.
Yes, I agree as well. Sometimes we only see the outside. We don't see the reason they're acting that way. I have a hard time I have a hard time believing that people get up one day and say, I'm just going to murder somebody for the fun of it, or I'm
Right.
going to do this to someone, do this to someone. So, yeah, I too agree with that.
Right.
So, are too many people walking around these days with unaddressed hurt? And if so, how can they take that self awareness and use it?
I think most people have experienced some form of trauma, whether something minor or something large. But and a lot of people have not sought understanding. So they're just kind of acting or reacting and living their daily lives and not really going through the process of digging much deeper. So I think anybody wants to gain self-awareness, there's plenty of books out there on trauma. My favorite is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's kind of the trauma Bible, if you will, but it has a lot of information in there for people to understand how it impacts your body and your brain. Other ways are just doing things like yoga or tai chi, something that calms the body down, even if you're not exploring the memory specifically.
Oh, so they may not bring up the specific scenario. However, it will calm everything down.
Right, it'll calm down your physical system.
Mhm. But don't you find it crazy how someone's trauma can affect others negatively, especially in a relationship or even just within the family? You know, happens to one person and everyone else is paying the price for it.
Right. For sure. Yeah, it definitely is something that other people have to experience. Most people's trauma, well, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people's trauma are interpersonal. So it has happened with another person, and it causes them to not trust other people or to engage in certain patterns with other people, and people on the receiving end aren't aware of it. I really do think the more people talk and get to know and get to understand each other, the easier it'll be to have empathy and help people work through some of this stuff.
Absolutely. It's not that you're dismissing your feelings, but you're able to meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. You can have boundaries and still have empathy for somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what are just some of the ways that people who are victims of sexual assault may unintentionally show their hurt?
A lot of people that are victims of sexual assault, you can go several different ways. Sometimes it'll cause them to not trust people in relationships at all, not want to engage sexually with people at all. Sometimes it'll do the opposite. It'll make people want to kind of take control of their sexuality and might appear promiscuous from the outside. It might not even come out sexually at all. It could come out just in how they interact with friends, how they interact in their world. I would say sexual trauma is one of the largest impacts that I've seen. Most people that have really significant interpersonal problems that are coming to me for trauma work have had some sort of early childhood sexual trauma or even later sexual trauma.
Okay. What about bullying? Because that is, if someone was bullied in elementary, it could very well affect them in their adult life as well.
For sure. I have somebody that comes in that was bullied by a teacher, unfortunately, but it's impacted her to this day. So she's 36 years old, and it's still something that happened when she was 9 years old. It's still directing the way that she sees herself and the way that she sees other people.
Oh, wow. So, how can someone not let what happened in the past affect their future?
I would say self-awareness, figuring out what it is that's driving your behaviors now, where it stemmed from is the first step. And then learning how to either do some inner child work around it, do some physical work, so somatic therapy around it. Even if people can't afford therapy, there's ways to figure out where everything is stemming from, explore your past, explore yourself, and try and change the way you behave moving forward.
So, what did you mean by inner child work? What does that mean?
That means a lot of times when people are stuck, like you mentioned earlier, stuck at a certain age, they are trying to meet that need as an adult. And really, what if you're looking at like a 6 year old doesn't have the same needs as an adult. A 6 year old needs nurturing and love. So if you're treating the illogical thoughts with adult logic, it's not going to go anywhere. So you go back and figure out what age did this trauma happen and what can I do now to receive that need. So add more connection to my life or add more play to my life, something like that.
Oh, okay. But do you believe that sometimes by just identifying where it stemmed from, that's healing enough?
I do, yeah. Because
Oh,
it's hard to once you're acting in the into the trauma response, it's hard once you have the logic of where it's coming from to continue doing it with at least some sort of pause. Without some sort of like, oh, I know this is stemming from my past trauma. That's why I'm acting this way. Not saying it's easy to switch it like that, but at least it's easier to pause a little bit and know that it's not happening in the present.
okay. Wow, that's really interesting. So now that more and more people are becoming advocates for mental health, do you believe therapy has a bigger future ahead? More people will be open to take therapy.
I do. Therapy is booming right now. I'm really excited with the mental health movement. I've had older men come in that would have never thought of coming to therapy before because there was just so much shame around if I go to therapy, I'm mentally ill. So I have older men, people from different cultures where culturally they've been taught, don't go to therapy, or their parents are upset with them for going. And they're kind of learning from the mental health movement that it's okay to seek healing. So I think it really is just going to keep expanding, and I'm hopeful for people to make a big change.
But what is it that I applaud a lot of people who do go to therapy who are able to take that accountability, saying, hey, may not be my fault, but I'm not going to die this way. So why is it so hard to take the accountability and self-awareness? Why can't everybody do it, or at least most people?
And people have pretty strong defense mechanisms that have been built up from years of patterns. So a lot of times it's hard for people to look at themselves, because if they did, they'd have to change their whole schema of the world. Um, and that takes a lot of mental work. So it's definitely not easy to do. You have to be in the right mindset. You also have to keep in mind that a lot of people are in survival mode. So they've learned these patterns because that's how they've survived their childhood. And even though they might not need the patterns anymore, that's how their body has learned, this is how I stay alive. So it's hard to go in and challenge some of those things. But um, I think there definitely needs to be more resources as well. Therapy can be pretty expensive, and a lot of people just aren't able to make that a priority in their lives. So a lot of different reasons that people might not take a look, but hopefully it's getting better, easier for people.
Yes, yes, I do hope so. But thank you so much, Nicole, for coming on. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys learned a lot. Stay tuned next for the Curious Talk podcast. Thank you guys so much. Have a
Yeah.
good one.